So like I said, we are here to talk about the MD-PhD training process and what the application process looks like to apply to MD-PhD programs. My name is Mitch Butler. I am a G1 in the UIC MSTP MD-PhD program. And in our lingo, that means I'm a first-year grad student. So I have completed the first 2 years of my training, and I'm about halfway through my third year, which is crazy to me. Here are all our delightful panelists. We wanted to focus on bringing perspectives from earlier students in the program because they themselves have very recently just gone through the application process. And so they have some of the most up-to-date and cutting edge, if you will, info and details about the process, and their experiences will be invaluable to you to hear about, I'm sure. So my co-lead for this panel is Alejandra Cavazos. And we also have—
Hi, everyone.
Oh, okay.
I'm Alejandra, and I am an M2, which means I'm in my second year of medical. Everything good?
Yes, we're good. We're good. Yeah. Perfect. I just couldn't see you on the screen. Okay.
Oh.
Yeah. So we have Alejandra, we have Susie Albernaz, we have Sam Feldstein, we have Joey Najar, we have Najar, excuse me. We have Brenna Kirkpatrick and Kate Alexander as well. All of us on the call. So I wanted to get the night rolling as we did with the last panel by just having everybody give some introductions and answer these 8 interesting questions. So I answered some of them. I'll go last. I want to start with Alejandra. Why don't you go?
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Alejandra Cavazos. My hometown, well, I'm from all over the place, but I did spend 16 years in Texas. And the reason why I have been all over the place is because my dad is also an MD-PhD. So with different times of training, you know, we had to move at different places for residency, for fellowship, for things like that. So that is the life of an MD-PhD person. So my undergraduate institution is University of Texas at San Antonio, and my major was biology. I am currently an M2, which means I'm in my second year of medical school, and I'm about to take my first board exam, my step 1 exam. My research interests are in cancer. Basically, I have been working in cancer for the last, I believe, 6 years. I'm not sure. And then my clinical interests also are in cancer, and my long-term career goals would be hopefully to be, you know, able to split my time between the clinic and the lab pretty well. I think I would also like to do some teaching and hopefully have my own lab one day. And my other passions, interests, and hobbies, I guess I'm an artist. So I do some art on the side, and that is my little getaway from school. And that's it. Oh.
Thank you, Alejandra, and thank you for being here and for being my amazing co-lead.
No, thank you.
You're next up, I think.
Hi, everyone. I'm Susie. I am from Central California, so kind of like the heart of the ag land. I went to, shout out. I went to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, and my major there was microbiology. I am also an M2 in the program. So I'm with Lex, so Alejandra, and with Sam. We're both all M2s. I'm going to be joining a lab which focuses on computational microbiome research in the spring after we take step 1, which is our first board exam. Clinical interests, ID, top of the list. I was interested before Corona, I promise, but now it's even cooler. Long-term career goals, I definitely want to stay in academic medicine, would be probably like my main thing. I don't know where I'm going to end up, but hopefully at a good institution. And then passions and interests. One of my passions is bothering my fellow students. So Sam and Alejandra, I love to do that. But I guess maybe like kind of something cool my family does is we compete in sandcastle competitions on the California coastline. So yeah, it's kind of a fun fact.
That is the epitome of a fun fact. Wow. Thank you for all of that, Susie, and thank you for being here. Sam.
Hi, my name is Sam. I'm originally from New York City. I went to undergrad at Northwestern University, where I majored in neuroscience. And so I'm also an M2, like has been said. So it's my second year of getting ready to take step one. My research interests are in immunology, particularly like autoimmunity. And that kind of goes with my clinical interests. So I think I want to do like rheumatology possibly, because they're all like autoimmune diseases basically. And yeah, so my long-term career goals, not entirely sure, but I do probably want to be in academic medicine with a lab, possibly also teaching and some clinical work. So we'll see. And then my other passions, interests. So I love TV, love movies, love football. Those are the big three. So yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Sam, for being here. Awesome. Next we have Brenna.
Hi, everyone. I am Brenna. I am from the suburbs of Nashville, Tennessee, and I went to the University of Kentucky for undergrad. I was a major in chemistry and French. I am a first-year student in the program, so somewhat fresh here. I have a lot of research interests. So far, I have mostly done cancer biology and women's reproductive health oriented research, but I'm interested in potentially neuroscience or psych. I'm not exactly sure what I'll end up doing, but that's kind of the beauty of the rotations that are built into the program, is that people can explore different kinds of science. So looking forward to doing that starting this summer. Clinical interests, also not sure. Thought about OB-GYN, thought about psych, thought about pretty much every specialty, and I think it's pretty tough to really narrow it down until you've had some clinical experience. So holding out for that, keeping an open mind. Long-term career goals, also don't know. I haven't done a PhD yet, so I don't necessarily know what it's going to look like to do research full-time. So I definitely know that I want to be a clinician, and I hope that I want to incorporate research into my work in the future, but I don't envision myself having a lab. So that's one thing that I think that I can say. Other passions, interests, hobbies. I'm a runner. I run all over Chicago, and I like to use running as an excuse to go to different places and do races. And I like cooking and playing with my dog. And those are the big things.
I love it. Thank you for being here, Brenna, and sharing that with us. Joey, next up.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. I am Joey. I am from Santa Fe, New Mexico, and I went to undergrad at a little liberal arts school called Occidental. I majored in chemistry there, and I am currently an M1 like Brenna. My research interests right now are kind of genetic engineering and microbiology. Clinical interests are kind of along those same lines with infectious disease and immunology being at the top of the list. Long-term, hopefully thinking of combining clinical care, teaching, and research. And then my passions and interests are things like running, hiking, cooking, and improv.
Awesome. Thank you, Joey. And last but certainly not least, we have Kate Alexander.
Hi, y'all. So as Mitch said, my name is Kate. I'm also an M1 like Brenna and Joey. I'm originally from Beaumont, Texas, which was once named the least educated city in the country. So that's like my fun fact. People have probably heard 1,000 times. But despite that, I did go to college here now. I went to WashU in St. Louis, and I majored in biochemistry. Currently, like I said, M1. My research interests are broadly in tumor metastasis, with an interest also in the tumor microenvironment and the tumor immune microenvironment. As I've come to UIC, I've kind of explored some of my more socially oriented interests as well. So long term, I'm really interested in looking at structural violence and systemic racism and trying to understand how these social factors influence what is perceived as like biological underpinnings for differences in, cancer rates and outcomes as well. Hopefully use some of that insight to work with policymakers and try to affect some civil change too. So I guess, kind of along those lines, I'd be interested in having a multidisciplinary lab, wet lab, some computational stuff, maybe work with, some MPHs. I don't really know, kind of a harebrained idea at this point. So yeah, other passions and hobbies, nothing new, but I do love to cook. I also like to run, but I'm definitely not nearly as much of a runner as the other two. I also have a dog, and I am also into improv. So yeah, I'm excited to be here with y'all.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing all of that and for being here. Before we get going, I'll share a little bit more about myself. As you know, my name is Mitch. My hometown is this little town called Jarrettsville, which I only discovered, Jarrettsville, Maryland, which I only discovered after I left there, was for was less than 5,000 people for part of the time that I was there, I think. So it was even way smaller than I even imagined. I left Jarrettsville and I left Maryland to go to undergrad at the University of Southern California. And now actually, as it happens, my parents live in the Central Coast. They live in San Luis Obispo. So that's hence the raising the roof for Susie's old alma mater. I am a G1. I'm doing my PhD in the lab of Dr. Jeffrey Loeb, who is the chair of the neurology department at UIC. We study epilepsy in our lab, as well as doing some cool things with neurodegenerative disorders, but my research focuses on the epilepsy side, and I'm particularly interested in neuroimaging. My PhD is in the Department of Bioengineering. I'm still figuring out exactly what form my project will take, but fingers crossed it will go this route that we figured out, that it will be validating and further developing a novel method of diagnosing epilepsy non-invasively using a combined modality of structural MRI and spectroscopy. So it's a really exciting potential project, but still very much getting my feet wet, still a baby grad student, as I like to say. So as far as clinical interests, as many of our panelists have said, there are many, and it's very early in the program for me to say with any degree of certainty what I think I'll end up doing for my clinical career, except that I want to have a heavy level of clinical involvement in my career. It's very important to me that I'm seeing patients and interfacing with patients a lot. And I get the question, being interested in imaging a lot, then am I going to do radiology? And the answer is, I think I'm probably leaning towards not that, but I have a lot of years to explore. The one thing I am leaning heavily towards, I think, is working with kiddos. So it looks like it'll be a pediatric subspecialty for me, but we'll see. So as far as long-term career goals, as I mentioned, I really would like to have a heavily clinically integrated and oriented career, as all of us do as MD-PhDs, but it will definitely, I'm not sure if I'll end up running a lab, but I definitely want to be working at an academic institution and maybe have some teaching like Alejandra mentioned. But yeah, still formulating a lot of that. As far as other passions and interests, like I like to say my like purest and foremost love is are languages. Actually, I'm a huge linguophile. That's like I think the first thing in my Twitter profile. So I love studying languages. I love books. I love bookstores, just collecting books even more perhaps than reading them. And much as Brenna has used running as an excuse to explore Chicago, I'm also a runner, but I've used coffee shops to use as an excuse to explore Chicago. So that's a little bit more about me. And with that, I want to get rolling with tonight's panel. I realized though, I jumped the gun a little bit at the beginning. So I'll just introduce tonight's format. So we're going to do it very similarly to how we did the last panel. For those of you who are familiar, we just did the introduction portions, but the way the rest of the evening is going to look is we're first going to talk a little bit about kind of some overview points and highlights of the application process and what that looks like, and kind of draw out in broad strokes how things work. And then after that, we want to have a lot of time for some moderated questions and answers, as well as a live Q&A based off of us monitoring the chat and based off of your questions that we can answer in real time from all of the panelists who all have excellent informed perspectives and a variety of perspectives. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to Alejandra, who's going to talk to us a little bit about some of the underpinnings of the application process.
Okay, hi guys again, I'm Alejandra. And so I guess we're just going to start here. So there are several different types of programs for MD-PhD. You have your NIH supported ones, and then ones that are supported through the schools individually. So basically there's just a slight difference between those two. When you're getting NIH support, you have most likely like you have like a little bit of a better stipend. You have a little bit more of like accreditation there, and just a little bit more of oomph, I guess, in the program. And other ones, and it's not saying that the other MD-PhD programs are not good, but if you can, try to get into an MSTP because they do have a little bit more funding and a little bit more resources. So the other programs, because they don't have as many resources, they could be smaller in size and smaller in funding. Okay, and I guess there's 123 MD-PhD programs in the US. About 50 of them are NIH supported, and then the rest are just regular MD-PhD. So that's the difference between MSTP and MD-PhD. So basically there's a main timeline here. There are different applications that you have to do. So there's a primary application, and then there is a secondary application and interviews, and then decisions. And we can talk a little bit more about that. The next slide probably. Okay, so Amcas is the place that you're going to go to apply for everything. It's thankfully it's like a centralized application, and basically it's one application for almost all the schools that you're going to apply to. There is a different application for schools in Texas called the what is it? I'm sorry, Texas. I forgot. I'm so sorry. But there is a different application for Texas. All the medical schools. Oh, TMDSAS. Yes, exactly. Thank you, Kate. It's been a little while since I was applying. So basically, your application is going to, like the application itself, Amcas is going to open in early May. And that is really, really key because you want to start getting, it's a very, very, very long application. We're talking like 40, 50 pages. So if you can start in early May to like start editing and adding materials, that is fantastic. And then in late May, that's when, oh, right, correct. So most of the Texas MSTPs do not require you to do TMDSAS. Some of them do, but there's a lot of programs that don't require you to do either. I'm sorry, don't require you to do only the TMDSES. So basically in late May, the application's open for submission, and that's when you can actually submit it, but then it takes some amount of time for the applications to get reviewed and to get processed. So this could be anywhere between a couple days to months, and that will vary depending on when you submitted it. So the earlier it is, basically the faster it gets processed and the faster that the application can get sent to the medical schools. So it's a really long process, and the earlier you get started, the better. Okay, I see a question here. If you take the MCAT in June, would it be considered too late for your application? I know it's better to submit applications as soon as possible, but what do you have to do? Okay, so you can submit, yes, exactly. So as Sam's saying, is you can submit your score before your scores come in, and that will give it an opportunity to get reviewed and processed while you're waiting for your score. And MCAT, I can't remember how long it takes for them to give you your score back, but I'm thinking about a month.
Yeah, it's 3 to 4 weeks.
Yeah, exactly. So basically, once you're it won't get sent to medical schools until you have your MCAT, but it can get started for reviewing and processing. So it's good to send it in even if you don't have your MCAT score. Okay, next slide. Of course. All right, so the MD-PhD application components are, you have 2 additional essays. You have why MD-PhD, and then you have another essay for significant research experiences. You also have to get some additional recommendation letters. It's very helpful to have one from a research mentor, and you need a detailed log of research experience. So you're gonna have to literally count out the hours that you've spent researching and put that information in a little box. So it's very important to keep track of how much research you do, how many hours a week, and have that be accurate. Okay, so once you get the primary application in, now we go in and you'll get secondary applications. So the primary application, like I said, is that Amcas thing. It's very general, very broad. And then once the schools get that Amcas application, they will decide whether or not to send you a secondary application. And more often than not, you are going to get a secondary application, basically because there's another, to be honest, there's another fee associated with it. So Amcas Fees, you have a processing flat fee. And so it's going to be $170 plus tax. It's good for one school. And then $41 plus tax per additional school. Secondaries, like I said, it's a secondary application. So it's going to be more essays, more additional information, things like that. And they are program specific. So each program is going to have their own secondary application. And it's typically anywhere from $90 to $200 per program. So then once you get into interview, the financial part of that is some schools will help you travel and set up a hotel room for you, and some of them will not. So it's really important before you start applying to take these financial considerations into your mind and to start saving or doing whatever you need to do to get these applications in. Yeah, so there are some waiving policies. We will talk about those right now. So essentially, there is some financial support for MD-PhD applicants. So if you're applying to just medical school, usually travel and lodging is not included. But MD-PhDs or MSTP programs will sometimes cover either all of your travel or some of your travel, or some of your lodging or all of your lodging. So it's a mixed bag, but there are some programs that do pay quite a bit for you. There's also the fee waivers. I am less familiar with the fee waivers because I did not qualify, but I do know that some people here in this panel have more experience than I do. But I know that the fee assistance program, what it does is it asks for your parents' information, like whether or not your parents are married or divorced and all these different things. And they basically give you like a fee waiver for Amcas and then possibly for the secondaries as well. But you can also contact individual programs directly. And as I said, there are more people in this panel that have more experience than I do with fee waivers, but I was not given one. And it's my understanding that it's a little difficult to get them, but obviously very worth it to apply.
So I don't want to interrupt too long, Alejandra, but we did have someone ask in the chat about if anyone on the panel used the fee assistance waiver program, and if so, what their experience was like. Excellent question. I would love for us to address that once we get to kind of the Q&A portion so that everyone can benefit from the answers that are going in the chat here, as well as those who are watching afterward. So we will definitely address that afterward, as well as other questions related to fee waivers. And if you all could maybe like write down or like hold on to your questions for now, that would be fantastic. So that way it's totally okay. It's totally okay to have questions. We love it. That's what we're here for. But we just want to make sure everybody can benefit from those answers. Okay, go ahead. Sorry about that.
Okay, and I think we're ready for the next slide.
I think so too. So
okay. And that's all I have for you, and I'll pass it on to Mitch.
Cool. Okay, so now what we'd like to talk about is the last, and final phase of the larger process, which is kind of after the applications themselves have wound down and after you've gone to schools to go to interviews. And when you're deciding on what schools and when you're kind of playing the waiting game. But before we do that, I would like to cover a little bit more about phase 2, and just say that the secondary applications, not unlike the primary application for MD-PhD, generally have additional or separate content from the MD portions of the applications. So like the MD application system works very much the same way, but the difference with MD-PhD in the secondaries as with the primaries is often there will be additional essay content that you have to write. So Alejandra mentioned it's a very lengthy application. Secondaries can be lengthy as well. So that's just something that I wanted to emphasize. And a different type of content is also emphasized, and that is, stuff that is geared towards research interest and experience and kind of questions related to that sort of thing. Interviews, it's difficult to say much about much generally about the structure of interviews because they can be so very program dependent. Except that we wanted to emphasize that one advantage of being on the MD-PhD path is that frequently there is travel support, as Alejandra mentioned. So now I'll talk about the last and final phase, as it were, of the application process. So what do you do when you're finished applying and you're finished interviews and you're still in the throes of this very long months and months long application cycle? First, I would say congratulate yourself. You will have come so far. You have worked so hard, put in so many hours of effort and mental and physical energy to this. It's important, no matter how things are going, to take a step back and give yourself some well-earned applause and rest for completing this process. Another thing that we thought it would be really good to emphasize is that your interview does not have to be your last word or your last bit of contact with the school, especially if there's one program that you are just in love with and you feel great about. it is often highly encouraged and most welcome to maintain contact with programs like that, even if it's just to reiterate your interest in that program. Many programs will also let you know that they're totally open when you have any and all personal updates about academic achievements or other kind of accomplishments or things that you have accomplished or done or are bringing to the table that you would like the school to know about. So don't keep it in your back pocket that you can totally continue to reach out to the folks that you met at these schools and at these programs, and the interview doesn't have to be the last thing that you do. We also just wanted to provide kind of one example picture of what, after all is said and done, what one program looks like, what one class for one program looks like, and what a picture is of the sort of like of the numbers. So our program at the UIC MSTP, we receive about 350 applications every year. And for this particular year, we have available 15 NIH funded positions. And in total in the program across all years, we have been growing of late, actually, because of an increase in from year to year at times in the NIH funded positions. Now we have up to 94 students. And we also thought it important to emphasize when we're talking about the numbers and the statistics that people come to our program and people come to MD-PhD programs and apply to programs from all across the country. And not just that, but from all different walks of life prior to MD-PhD. So one of the questions we're going to discuss, and one of the things we'll discuss, I'm sure, with the moderated Q&A and in the live Q&A is, what made you decide to apply when you did? And that story is different for everybody. But this is just kind of an overall picture that we wanted to give everyone.
If I can jump in real quick, I also
Please.
I also wanted to say that one difference between MD-PhD and MD by itself is that usually when you're applying to MD schools, you're going to be more considered in the state that you belong to, and it's kind of harder. Like if you're applying to only MD, it's harder to get like an acceptance in a state that you're out of state from. But that's not the case with MSTP because they have the funding to pay for you. So
Great point.
That's why there's people you can be from anywhere in the United States.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really excellent point that I totally glossed over. And lastly, before we get to kind of the Q&A stuff, we wanted to talk a little bit about where you can go for additional resources. Besides, there's of course this panel. You're here because you're interested in this process and you want to learn more. We also wanted to let you know and direct you to some places where you can learn even more. So the AAMC, which is the curator of that primary application, that centralized forum for the starting thing for the process, does have a lot of good information on their website. So we would definitely direct you to them and to their applying to MD-PhD programs page and their other related content. The NIH also has a lot of good information about what these programs are and how to apply. And they also have good detailed information as it relates to the research funding available at different institutions. And that's something that you all can explore for yourselves on an individual basis when you are making your list of schools that you want to apply to, and or if when you're deciding between different programs. Another really important and huge resource and wealth of knowledge and experience will be your research and clinical mentors. And this doesn't have to be This doesn't have to be your PI. It can be a PI. That is to say, the principal investigator, the person who kind of oversees your research work in whatever form that takes. Your research mentors and your mentors that you work with during your clinical experiences will often be, if they're not themselves, in this kind of academic medicine space, they will more likely than not be connected to those who are. And those can be great people to draw on for general advice, but also advice through others that they know about, various programs or about other aspects of the process as well. And lastly, this is kind of an obvious one, but do make a point of consulting the websites of the specific programs that you're applying to when it comes down to deciding on your list and deciding on between schools, because more often than not, there will be a lot of good information about how the specific programs work there. So now we're going to move on to the moderated Q&A. We have some prepared questions and things we received in advance from participants in the panel. And then once we run through those, we'll get back to the live Q&A and answer some of those questions that started some great discussion in the chat earlier. So the first question, and I want to put this out to all the panelists, is why did you choose to apply to MD-PhD program? This was one that we asked all our panelists last time, but I think this is a really good one to start with. So, and I'll just kind of go in a random order, but Alejandra, you're first on my ICU right now, so you can feel free to go ahead.
Okay, so I, for a while, was flip-flopping between whether I wanted to get an MD or whether I wanted to get a PhD. And then I chose to do a postbac, which is like it's like a job that you do after you get hired by like a school or institution or whatever after you graduate from college. So I was at a postbac at the NIH for 3 years, and I was working in the brain neuro-oncology unit. And basically I was able to, I had the fortune of being in a branch that had both clinical and bench work. So I could go shadow a physician, one of the physicians there, or I could work in the lab. So I was working in the lab and I would shadow, and we would always have like these meetings where all the physicians would come in, all the researchers would come in, and they would present their research, and the doctors would comment on the research and see how they can make it better. So I kind of noticed that these two types of people were kind of speaking different languages, and sometimes they couldn't really understand each other. So you had like the medical jargon versus the research jargon, and kind of like it took a while sometimes for ideas to get across, or for for certain people to understand certain concepts. And I kind of realized that there was, one MD PhD in our group, and he was able to kind of bridge the conversation a little bit. And it just made me realize that it's a different, speaking those two different languages can help get a lot of ideas across, and a lot of things that you wouldn't normally think of. When you have clinicians, the clinicians know what questions need to be answered, but they don't know how to answer those questions. And then the researchers know how to answer questions, but they don't necessarily know which clinical things are the most important. So it kind of made sense to me to apply to an MD-PhD program so that I could ask clinically relevant questions and then have the tools to answer those questions with my PhD. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry, wonderful. That is such a great story experience. Joey, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. So definitely along similar lines. I noticed when I didn't do a postbac, but during college when I was an undergraduate researcher, I noticed that there was kind of a disconnect in the research that I was doing and any clinical applications of it, which is something that I really wanted to look into more. And so when I talked to my professor about that and how, I guess, some of the more clinical applications of it and how to get involved in that, he suggested that I look into the MD-PhD, and that kind of set me off on this path to finding out more about what you can do with both degrees that you can't really do with one or the other. And I guess along the same lines that Alejandro was talking about was just the idea that translational medicine and connecting the dots between the science and the way we explain that to patients and treat patients really does take someone with different training from what you get with either an MD or just a PhD.
Mm. Awesome. Thank you. Does anyone else want to tackle this question? If so, go for it. I don't want to cut anybody off or anything, but I'm looking at the time, and I definitely do want to get to the more application related questions. But
I just wanted to offer, just because like I came at it from a different way, more selfish, I guess.
Yeah, please.
Because I always wanted to be a doctor since I was little, like a clinical physician since I was little. And then I never, because I love science and I love pathology. I love like the nature of disease and things like that. And it wasn't really till like I was like after high school that I realized that like research was a thing. And I kind of got my first research position, and then I was like, oh, I really like this. And I started doing more research and less clinical stuff. And I was like, oh, I always want to be a doctor, but I really like research. So it's kind of like came to like a porque no los dos type of thing. And because I really do love the MD, like what you learn from an MD is different than what you learn in a PhD. I really love learning all of the things, but I probably do want to do research more than clinical work. So I really love learning all that, and I really love having appreciation for all that. And it probably will come into play when I do my research, but I ultimately do want to do research. So that's why I did the PhD. So it was kind of more of like, I just wanted to do both. I did both.
Yeah, I definitely think a lot of us can relate to that. I'm gonna go ahead, Kate.
I'm happy to talk about my personal story. Also, sorry, my dog's crazy, another time, but I did want to just quickly comment that a question that you'll be asked a lot, and maybe we'll touch on this later, is like, why do you want to do both your MD and your PhD and not both? Like that comes up all the time. And so, you'll hear a lot of people have different opinions, like they've been in this for a while, and some really strongly believe that, you don't have to have both. And like a lot of people tell you that you can do research with an MD, so why not just do that? But I think that, the depth and the rigor of these combined training programs, and also the specific courses that you get as a graduate student, because you do take classes in your first year, and I think year two, Mitch knows more than I do on that.
It depends, but yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so, you can do research with just an MD. But I think it's also important to note that through these programs, you're supported. So of course, I think, some of the financial concerns are very real, but I think, that coupled with just the specific courses that you'll have to help you with like how to run a lab, how to work with a team. Like there are very specific nuanced things that I think having the PhD in that training pathway makes it very worthwhile. So yeah.
Yeah. That's a really excellent point. And that is definitely something that does come up on the applications and in the interviews. And that's, I think that's excellent. Thank you for bringing that up. In that vein, in the vein of the same question, we wanted to think about like, what are the kind of biggest factors? What are the most important things to consider before you apply? And what made you decide to apply when you did?
Wait, are you asking me?
Anybody.
Oh, okay.
Kate, you can go for it, but like anyone can jump on it. But.
Sure. I think, kind of just building off of what I was just saying, I think, being mindful of the time. I will say that a lot of people told me that if anything, I was kind of worried about things that might happen later in my 20s and, like different life accomplishments and just all of these different things that people consider. And I feel like when you're going the medical path, like sometimes there really isn't a great time. And, I think if anything, the PhD like gives you a little bit of time in between too. Not that like influenced my decision really much at all, but it was just a nice unexpected perk to find. Depending on the program, depending on the lab. I took 2 years off, and I wanted to do that because I actually knew I wanted to pursue an MD-PhD really young. Kind of like Sam, I wanted to, be a physician from a very young age. I had a family history of cancer, and it really motivated me to be interested in that clinically. And then I just randomly started doing research, fell in love with it, and realized that that was bridging the gap to actually help with developing these tools to diagnose and treat cancer. So, having this in the back of my mind, I kind of early in college started to think about taking gap years. I wanted to kind of recover from college, if I'm being honest, but then also I did a postbac at the NIH as well. And I think, just talking to different people who've been through the process, physician scientists, or people who are physician scientists and don't have the MD PhD, but wish that they did. My mentor was an MD and always joked about wanting to get back to school and get her PhD. So I think to come back to the question, most important things to consider, I would say, like the time is important. It's can be worked with. You can still have a life and be in an MD PhD program. I think cost is really important. We kind of touched on this, but I really, really strongly encourage y'all to start thinking about, like how you can save up for your applications. And, you might have to pay stuff up front and then you get covered later. So thinking of things like that, like, do I want to get a credit card with travel points to help build credit and also pay for some of these flights if we're flying then? So yeah, I think just, hopefully that answered the question.
Yeah, no, that's exactly the kind of stuff. Like you mentioned gap years and thinking about these different things. I think in the vein of like talking about the application process, this is like important stuff to talk about besides just like raw data that, that we can just get anywhere. So.
Yeah, I don't know if you want to move on to the next question or.
Go ahead, Sam. Yeah, we have some time. I just like, I love, we all love the like, why did you choose this question? But, I don't want to deprive our listeners of like the content they came here for tonight. So
I just wanted to talk about gap years because it kind of like what made you decide what you did. And Lex can definitely talk way more about gap years because she took 6. But I took 0 gap years. I came right out of undergrad. And I just want to highlight, like, if you think that's the right decision for you, then do that, go right out of undergrad. But I want to say why I think personally that was a mistake for me for a few reasons. Well, and at first I'm very happy. I lucked out so much. I'm so happy where I am. But I still think in the grand scheme of things, like it was still a mistake to do that for a few reasons. One, it was really hard to like finish undergrad, turn around and start grad school and start medical school immediately. But besides that, and this is something I realized starting to go on my interviews, is just the fact of the matter is you're not as strong of a candidate if generally, if you haven't done a significant amount of research full time, which is something schools really want to see. And like I would go on my interviews and I was the only undergrad there, like everyone else had taken gap years. And I kind of like realized that I was somewhat at a disadvantage, and this is just my experience. Some people might think people have a different opinion, but my experience was that and some of the conversations during my interviews indicated that as well, that I did not have the research experience. And I did research all through undergrad and in summers and got grants, and like I had so much experience, but they were like, yeah, but you didn't spend like 40 hours a week doing it for like at least 1 year. And you could still I got into places, like I got in here, like even coming right out of undergrad, but I definitely think that if you want to be the most as competitive as you can be, like definitely do at least 1 gap year. And that's just my opinion on that.
And I can actually touch on a contrary to Sam's experience. So I applied my junior year, so to be going into medical school right after undergrad, and I was not accepted anywhere. So I had to reapply in order to get in, and I definitely had to reevaluate a lot of my decisions in applying the second time, because having applied once, I'd already spent a lot of money on applications and invested a lot of time. And I had to think a lot about what exactly do I want from my experience. So my second time around, I applied to far fewer schools, was much more focused on MD-PhD as opposed to kind of being across the board. And I ended up just taking one gap year. I spent it doing research at UIC, and I'm extremely grateful that I had that year because it provided me with so much perspective of what doing research 40 hours a week, as Sam said, is actually like. And I wish that I had known how much research experience is really required and expected to even enter into a regular MD program alone. So I would highly recommend planning on taking at least one gap year. And that was something that I wasn't necessarily really encouraged to do. And that wasn't really the standard at my school, where most people were in-state students who were applying to in-state institutions. So that was something that I wish I had known, is definitely consider taking gap years. Don't be in a rush. Taking gap years is really nice, and having some experience in the world, being somebody who works, is nice.
Yeah, that's all really, really excellent perspective. If anyone else wants to jump on this question, that's great, or we can move to the next one.
Just one more thing, I guess, to add.
Please.
You definitely don't have to just consider research or grad school also in between. I guess I'm like somewhat of a non-traditional applicant in the sense that I didn't do research in my gap year. I did, I worked for a law firm. And so there's not like a one size fits all. So if you don't necessarily end up doing something like working in a lab, there's also other things that you can do, like ruling out things that you then find out that you don't want to do. Like I now know I don't want to do law, and that's also totally okay.
Yeah, that's such a strong point and such an important point. Thank you for adding that, Joey. All right. This is really, really great perspective. I'm so glad we had this question in here. And kind of in a similar vein, but a little bit, I guess, sort of boiling things down to their essence. Like we talked a little bit about this, but what would you all say are the key factors for deciding which places to apply?
I can jump on this one because I think something you'll learn in medicine research is to think of things systemically, and I think this in like a nice pathway, and I think that can help a lot because, like I said, there's 50 schools, and I'm guessing you're probably not going to want to apply to all 50, if nothing else, time and cost of money. So probably one of the primary things to first think about is like when you get your Mcat and Gpa scores. So Mcat scores, Gpa scores, and you can look at how much research that you do have. Like, do you have publications or not? And use those to kind of whittle down into a range of schools. Like, I fit into these stats. These are reach schools. These are, I for sure could probably get into them. Like, I'd whittle it down there. And then location. Because if you're going to spend 8 years there and you're like, I hate this state, don't apply there. Like, just don't do it. You're not going to be happy for the next 8 years. So whittle it down by that. And then after that, like what I think was the next best thing to do is to look at the research and look at the institutions themselves. So like, are they a really big cancer institution? Are they really big XYZ, whatever you're really interested in, and like the funding? And that's, I think, kind of a nice like process pathway to like think of how to narrow down the schools. And then there's also, I forget what the tool's called on, you can like, you pay for the year subscription and you can
I'm trying to look it up right now. I can't remember what it's called.
Yeah. It's $30 for a year subscription and it was worth it. I'm sorry. Thank you. Yes. Thank you, Christian. I'm sorry. 100% worth it because you don't have to go and find all the stats yourself. You can just like put in filter by what schools, like, you know, whatever stats you like. And it does make it a lot nicer. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Thank you, Susie.
Also a really good tool that you guys can use in order to look at like research. So let me see can I share my screen real quick, Mitch?
Yeah, you should have sharing power. Let me stop and then, yeah, go for it, Alejandra.
Okay, so it says host disabled participant screen sharing.
You should be a host. Hang on.
Okay, so basically this is called NIH Reporter. You can just Google NIH Reporter, click on it, and it'll take you right to it. So it's NIH Reporter. And basically what you can do is you can type in like keywords, like let's just do glioblastoma. So if I wanted to put in glioblastoma, because I was researching it, I could look in here and see all these different grants that people got from the NIH, right? So if I wanted to sort by like NCI, here's NCAT, here's NCI, which is the National Cancer Institute. So glioblastoma was a type of brain cancer. So like New York University here has a grant. They have $37,000. You can search by the amount of money that they got. So you can see here that University of California in Los Angeles has, $7 million for GBM research. There's different types of ways that you can look for it, but there's also, if you want to do it for the individual institution, like if I put University of Illinois, and look it up. You can look at all the different, like the different things that we have. This one's at Champaign, but you can go back and do University of Illinois, look up, and then we just want to do the ones at Chicago. Okay, perfect. So we'll just do that. And then let me put in a different one. I put in a search for prostate cancer. And so now I'm looking at all the different abstracts and grants that may have to do with prostate cancer or a cancer. And so this is a good way to find, like, let's just say you get an interview, you get an interview somewhere and you want to see like what kind of topics you can, who you're going to interview with or who you want to talk to. This is a good way to do that. It's also a good way to find projects that you're really interested in and from all over the country. That way you can choose who you want to apply to. So yeah, that's NIH Reporter.
Lex, on your last screen, shout out to one of our students who actually had a grant listed on Morgan Zenner had a grant listed there. So just goes to show. But,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, this is an excellent resource, you all, for looking into kind of the research side of things when considering, where to apply and what places might be doing these sorts of things that you're interested in. Yeah. Thank you for sharing this, Lex.
Yeah, of course. And I can stop my screen sharing.
Cool. There we go. Okay, does anyone else have any kind of golden nuggets for us about this that they would like to share?
Can I add like one more thing?
Yeah, go for it.
Definitely. I mean, it might not seem super important, I guess, from your perspective now, but I think looking for schools, making sure that you're applying to schools that do like pass fail in the medical school years. I think most schools do now, but it's actually like a pretty stress. But it's a nice way of relieving a lot of the stress that med school could otherwise cause when you know that you don't have to compete with your classmates.
Yeah, kind of real quick on that vein. Well, two things. Jumping on that, I think if you can get like a sense of the curriculum, I feel like, I always reflect on how grateful I am to be here because I do feel like, not to like toot our own horn, but I feel like I didn't expect like med school to be this manageable, I guess. Like, of course, it's still stressful at times, but I think even if it is pass fail, like, for example, we do block systems. And so, like Joey said, it doesn't seem like a big deal now. But I was apprehensive about, oh no, can you guys hear me?
Yeah. Oh, you're muted now.
Oh, you're muted now.
Uh-oh.
I'm back.
Yes.
My like screen just like completely died. But yeah, so oh my gosh, what was I saying? I think I was overwhelmed at the prospect of like, we have a big block and it's weeks and weeks and weeks, and then we have one exam, but the little things in between that, coupled with things being pass fail and like we have a week to prep, I actually like it so much more than most of my other friends have like weekly quizzes, weekly exams that are heavily graded. And so I think that might be more of like a, when you're deciding where to actually go kind of thing that we'll touch on later. But I think another really quick tidbit is if you're really passionate about a certain field of research, I would just try and make sure that that school has the resources that you want to actually do that research. So if you're really passionate about NMR, and you go to a place that doesn't do NMR and doesn't have like nearby institutions with which it can collaborate, I think that's more of a nuanced thing if you have a really intense interest, but that's something to keep in mind too. So.
Definitely.
I also want to add, just like really broaden your scope if you can. Like, obviously don't apply anywhere where you don't think you would go at all, but like, remember, like, nowhere, like everywhere is a reach and nowhere is a safety when it comes to like MSTP or MD-PhD applications. So like, don't get bogged down by like big names or huge schools, which unless like sometimes like, unless those places have something specific that you're looking for, but like apply to smaller schools, look to apply to lots of different kinds of places if you think you might go there, just because like I said, like everywhere is a reach and nowhere is a safety.
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting that. One thing I would like to offer too is that like location, like Susie said, is important. To like, definitely don't like I know I did that with one state that I knew I didn't want to live in, and that was a personal choice. But by the same stretch, just as Sam said, the place where I ended up was actually never a place that I thought I saw myself living, because I grew up and experienced the two coasts of the United States, and I'd never been to the Midwest until I came to UIC. So I think, broadening your scope is really, really excellent advice.
I agree. I actually never pictured myself in Chicago, and I had a completely different top school. And one thing to consider is that like I got into the school that I wanted to go to, and I got into UIC, but I loved the UIC second look so much that I completely dropped the other school that I wanted to go to, and I decided to come to Chicago. So second look is very important. Like the fit is for me, the most important thing. Like, the name, no matter what, you're going to get the same education everywhere. It's the same, like medicine doesn't change from school to school. So you're still going to learn the same stuff. But the fit was the most important thing for me. I loved the people. I loved the program. I loved Julie, which is our coordinator. So there's just a lot of things that kind of like, everything in me was like, you don't want to go to that top school anymore. You want to go to UIC.
Yeah, real quick, I'll say like you can tell.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Want to go ahead?
Say this isn't like supposed to be. This isn't like we're just saying this like to help you in general. We're not like
yeah. This is not for UIC. It was just in general that fit is important. That's the key thing to take away from here.
Yeah, and like you can tell people you got into XYZ school, like if that's something that is even on your mind. But at the end of the day, like, do you really want to live there? And it might be a difficult choice where, you apply to a school, it has a field that you're really passionate about, but the city might be more important than you think, and it's kind of hard to kind of parse that out since we've been doing Zoom interviews as of late, but hopefully you guys will be able to do like a second look when you're applying. So. Yeah.
All really, really excellent points. Thanks, y'all. So now we'll kind of take a step further in that direction and talk a little bit about something a bit more kind of logistical and quantitative, but very much related. And I know from personal experience, people approach this very differently. So how did you decide how many schools to apply to? In your view, how many is too many and how many is too few? Brenna, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I think you have a really good perspective on this that you alluded to earlier. So if you would like to offer anything, that would be awesome.
Sure. So I will say that I have a pretty unique application experience, but the first time around I applied, finished primary and secondary applications to probably around 20 to 25 schools, which I think is pretty typical. It cost probably $3,000, maybe. I can't even remember exactly how much it was, but it was a lot of money. And when I wasn't admitted to any programs, I knew at that point that I only wanted to take one gap year, so I was going to turn around and apply again. And I was definitely burnt out on the application cycle. So I ended up submitting about the same number of primary applications, but I got to the point where I really wanted to be at a specific program. And so I think I might have completed 7 secondary applications the second time around, but I had really established myself at a particular institution, which is UIC. And I knew at that point that I wanted to stick around. So I think it's a little bit riskier to do that, but it's, you can apply to different numbers of schools and still find yourself at a school where you want to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think you touched on something really good, which is that, we looked at the finances before of the primaries and the secondaries, and it is a lot and it adds up really fast. But I think it's important to note, because I did the same thing, like just because you apply to a school via primary doesn't mean you are locked into completing the process, fully for every school, because you may decide that at somewhere along the line that, that's not sustainable for you, or like you overdid it. And that is more than fine. There's nothing wrong with that at all. In fact, I think we would all encourage you to listen to that impulse and do what makes the most sense for you. Anyone else want to tackle this question?
I can jump in. I applied, if I remember correctly, I applied to about 30. So I applied to as many as I could, just because I was scared that I wouldn't, I don't know, it's just, imposter syndrome, you just think that you're not going to get any interviews. And so I applied to about 30, and I think I got 15 interviews. And then, I got accepted to a handful. So it kind of like, the more you apply to, obviously the better chances you have, but it's really expensive. And I was very fortunate to be able to apply to that many schools. But yeah, there's no too many, too few. It just depends on you and what you can handle.
Yeah, I applied to about, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, go ahead, Kate.
So I applied to about the same number of schools, but one thing that we might touch on later too is try to turn your secondaries around a little bit sooner, because timing really is important. I think we are going to touch on this later, and I can hit on it later also, but yeah, I mean, don't stress yourself out a ton. Like if something happens, like and you can't turn it around, it's not like you're done for, but it is better to turn it around as soon as you can. Because there was one school that I literally applied like a few hours before the deadline. I really wanted to interview if I could, but I didn't think that I had the numbers or whatever. Like I kind of sold myself short. And then I literally got an email a week later saying, reserve the state just in case. We would have interviewed you, but you applied too late. So also don't sell yourself short.
Yeah, we'll definitely talk more about that later, and I'm sure in kind of the open Q&A. But it's sort of a difficult thing that about this process, that there are the written deadlines that are posted, and then there's kind of the unwritten deadlines. And really, the name of the unwritten deadlines is that, you know, earlier is better. It's it's somewhat of an unfortunate aspect of how the process works, but it is an important reality to be aware of with the primary and the secondaries, as Kate mentioned. So looking back, what is one thing you would have done differently while applying? I know some of you have touched on this, but if anyone really wants to go for this one, then by all means.
Like in the application process, or like in deciding?
I would say while applying, and you can answer the second one too, but I was like, while applying in the application process, I would say.
I think and I think the next question you have planned touches on this too, but just realize it's whether or not you decide to do MD-PhD, MD, PA, whatever, the application process is going to be a year. Like it's going to be, you're going to start, if you start to fill out the application when it opens in May, okay, that's May. And then interviews aren't going to come around until fall. They can go through winter, second looks in spring. It's a very, very long process. So if I could have done one thing differently, it would have been to have a better perspective starting out, which I didn't know. Like, I do not come from an area with a lot of doctors or even people who go to grad school. So I had no idea what I was doing. But if I had known that like it's going to be a marathon, and you want to kind of prepare yourself for that and prepare yourself for the fact that you're going to be rejected from a lot of schools. Like it's going to happen. You could be the most outstanding candidate and they're going to tell you no. And that's okay. And it's not personal. It might be they already had a bunch of people. It might be they're like, I think they could be better somewhere else. It could be a whole myriad of reasons. So just be prepared for the fact that it's going to be a long process, whatever programs you decide to apply to. And then, yeah, don't take it personally if you do not even get a secondary or you don't get an interview from certain schools, because it happens to everybody. So it will be okay.
Good advice from current you to past you, and then to, you know, all those taking part in the application process going forward. Really good advice.
One thing to add also is in the period between when you're waiting to get your secondaries and when you've submitted and been verified for your primaries, someone mentioned it, you're probably going to get a secondary from most schools. So it wouldn't hurt. And one thing I wish I had done would be to pre-write your secondaries. There are various databases on the internet that have the secondaries from most of the schools available. And so if you go onto those, I mean, you can get, even if they change the questions, you can get an idea about what you want to write about, because that often is the hardest part, is starting your essays. And it can quickly, you know, if you get like 10, 15 secondaries all within a couple of days of each other and you want to submit those within a week, that quickly becomes very overwhelming. So pre-writing secondaries would be top of my list if I was going back.
Yeah, if you want to get ahead of it, you can look on SDN, which is a forum. It's called Student Doctor Network. And a lot of people will go ahead and post, if they have gotten a secondary, they'll go ahead and post the questions. Keep in mind for MD-PhD, sometimes they can be a little different. But for the most part, I think it was pretty much the same. And I kept a spreadsheet that basically was like overcoming. It was like, you know, like I would put the name of the school, and then like there was basically like 5 different essays that you had to write. It was like, what have you overcome? you had to write another personal statement, things like that. So then I would kind of be like, okay, well, I can use most of my essay from this school and apply it to this other school. So I just kept a spreadsheet full of like whatever the essays were, and then kind of like color coded it to make sure that I was like, okay, well, this one, I can do this one here. But also the biggest advice that I can give you is, and I know I've said it a million times, just do everything early. Like, I wish I would have listened to that advice, because I didn't do it as early as everyone else. And so like Kate said, they run out of interview spots. So even if they want to interview you, they can't, because they don't have any more spots for you. So that would be the different thing that I would have applied earlier.
Okay, sorry, another thing to hop in, because Lex said spreadsheet, and then reminded me of my number one thing I wish I would have done. So someone at my undergrad told me, like, oh, you should keep a spreadsheet of all your activities, and I did not do that. And she was right. I should have done that, because you have to like record for your AMCAS application, again, whatever you decide to apply to. They want to know like who was your supervisor or like a point of contact for that activity that you did, how many hours, and then like a little description of what you did. If you're volunteering, working in the lab, whatever, start recording that information now. Like every time you do something, like who was that person who was above you? What's their email? Usually it's just an email you needed, sometimes phone number. But like start recording that and recording the number of hours. We mentioned that earlier of research that you do. It will make your life a heck of a lot easier if you already have that information, as opposed to trying to find it when you are writing all your essays. So spreadsheets.
Yeah, I also did all this with spreadsheet, all my secondaries. I kept my spreadsheets also color coded. I actually I got from my school actually a spreadsheet with all of the schools and all of their secondary questions, and they were all exactly the same. They don't change from year to year. Maybe they will with COVID. They might put in a COVID question or something. That was really helpful. Definitely pre-write your secondaries,
I guess I'll reiterate, highly consider taking a gap year if you aren't considering it right now. It was really wonderful for me to perceive myself as something other than a student for a year. And after having taken a year, I think that I could have even benefited from more time. I'm very happy to be back in school now, but I'm really grateful that I had that time. And regardless of what you do, whether it's working on a farm or working as a tech, or a tech in a clinical setting, or a tech in a lab setting, or it's teaching in another country, or whatever it might be, I just highly recommend having the chance to see yourself as something other than a student, because it can be a really nice experience. And I think it's making my school this year so much better than it would have been if I had gone straight through.
Yeah, to echo, like, I agree with everything that's been said. Definitely for me personally, I think time is a big thing. One thing that I did for one school that kind of was like I caught it at the last moment, and I would recommend this, is there was one school that had sent me a couple of emails, and I kind of kept putting off sending back the secondary. And so I called the program administrator, and they said, oh, even though the deadline to submit the secondary was like a week away, I still hadn't heard back. It had been a few weeks. And so they told me, we have our last round of reviewing applications today, even though the deadline was like a week after. So I'll tell them to like pull the application and put it higher in the pile. And I ended up getting like the last interview slot for the last interview at that particular school. So I think this might be in the slides somewhere, or Mitch might have mentioned it, but if you like a program, or you feel like it'd be a good fit, or you haven't heard back in a while and you are invested, it is worth reaching out gracefully to the program leads. So yeah, administrators.
During your gap years, take advantage of the time to develop as a human being and pursue your passions, because once you get into school, it's not as much free time at all. And so if there are things that you're passionate about too, like one thing I liked was photography. It's not just that it also helps you like develop as a person, but that sets you apart from other people when you're interviewing and applying to schools too.
I think, again, I'm sorry, we should move on, but like
It's
Joey
okay.
said, also it's 8 years, and something that's like really important for me. I'm really close with my family. I've got a lot of siblings. And so spending a gap year at home was really important because some of my siblings are little and I wanted to be near them. So I think, like you said, finding out who you are as a person is really good too, because you'll be in a much better mindset entering this. But then also the fact that like you're going to be moving somewhere else for 8 years, like maybe your friends are really important to you, maybe family, maybe something you've always wanted to go do, like do it, take advantage of that. Because yeah, it's going to be a long time in a different place.
Yeah, this is all really good advice, a wealth of great advice. I'm really glad I had this question. I feel like questions like this always breed the most kind of honest answers and also fruitful. Like that was all really good advice. I would definitely say I was somewhere between the anti-spreadsheet and full-on spreadsheet person. And I too wish I would have been more regimented about monitoring that and putting stuff in so I didn't have to guesstimate things. And I wish I would have applied earlier. I was really good about some schools and not so good about other schools. And it, it's kind of like short-term pain for long-term gain. Because at the time you really may not want to do it and push it off, but it can save you some headaches later. But yeah, this is all great perspective. Thanks everybody. So kind of in the vein of what we were just talking about, what were the most difficult parts of the application process? We touched on that a little bit already. And something I wanted to address for sure is, what were your major sources of support when you were applying? Because as Susie mentioned, this is a long and arduous application process, and we're only single humans. Like it takes a village. It took a village to get us all here, and we drew on a lot of support. So if you all could lend some perspective on that, that would be great.
I think I was very, very fortunate. I have a pretty cool family, and I had really, really good friends in undergrad who, especially in the beginning of the process when it came to like writing. So I think you touched on it in the chat. A few of you guys were writing on that. But having multiple people like looking at your essay, reading your essay, that's like one way early on, like whoever you're in school with or you're around, if you're working, coworkers, like the more people who get their eyes on it, the better. Like some of my friends' moms who I never really knew read it, like random people, but that was really helpful and supportive in like the application process. And then I had like friends checking in on you and like the affirmation process, I like to say, being like just checking in, make sure how you're doing throughout the year and like keeping up with everything. So I'd say like don't shut yourself off from your friends and family during this. Like you might be really busy, but like if you have like a support network, like keep them involved with the whole process, because they can really help you in like ways you may not have even known that they could help you.
Just to add on to that real quick, this kind of goes to something from before, just things to consider when applying to. If you know that support system that you have in place is super important for you to have for the next 8 years when you're going through this pretty rigorous process, definitely consider that when you choose your schools, because you don't want to, say you live in California and you're applying to a school in Boston, you don't want, that support system is going to be very different than if you apply to schools in California. And so that's something to consider.
I just popped it in the chat, but I have said a few times, money and saving up for the process was really difficult for me. I'm talking like had just moved into my like second gap year apartment, was like eating a bag of brown rice with soy sauce in it, like with a plastic spoon. Like that was, I'm not exaggerating, like a reality. And we touched on this on a slide. Even if you don't qualify for an Amcas waiver, if your family's financial situation changes, if yours changes, if something just comes up, really reach out to schools individually. They can work some, which is, and, you know, UIC worked with me, not to plug, but they did work with me, which was awesome. And so the resource that I shared, it's called Digit. I do want to point out that I think it charges you like a monthly fee of $5 or something, which can be a little tedious, but it is helpful. I wish I did it sooner. What it does is if you feel comfortable using it, I think I would double check. I can put more resources in like reviewing it, but it will kind of analyze how much you have in like XYZ account that you want to link. And it can automatically pull money to like a little savings account for you. So you could have like an account named or like a savings thing on Digit called like Secondaries or or whatever you want to call it, travel. And you can link it to your credit card too, to like automatically pay your credit card. And then you can have a threshold that you set. So Digit will monitor your account that you're like transferring funds from. And if it falls below a certain amount of money, it'll like automatically take the money out of your fund that you set up and put it back in your checking. So highly recommend that. Saving is really key. So, and don't have too many people read your essays, because definitely get a lot, but at a certain, it's kind of like, you know, so many different edits that like, how do you reconcile them? And at a certain point, some people like one thing, other people don't like it. At the end of the day, you just got to go with your gut. I was living with one of my best friends, and so that was really helpful. And I got to work with one of my heroes for my second gap year, and I became really close with her in the lab. She was like a second mom before the pandemic. And I'll get to the question in a minute, but before the pandemic, I would get to fly home every now and then. So that was really important to me, my family and friends as well. And for reviewing your essays, so it really depends. I would also, this is kind of like a sneaky hack, but if you have a favorite professor in college, if you have a favorite TA, like my organic chemistry TA became like my sage mentor, has given me all this amazing advice, could send him any essay, could send him any draft questions. There are people who want to help you, who are open to that for sure. And so I would recommend, if you have like a pre-health club, a pre-science club, if you can't think of a TA or a professor or a research mentor or a pre-med advisor, any of those people are great to reach out to. You know, maybe look at the science or medicine oriented clubs, or even like any club really. I mean, it doesn't have to be a person involved in science. In fact, sometimes it's good to have someone who isn't in science who can just tell you how it reads. But I think, you know, to boil it down, mentors, advisors, people you trust, and yeah.
Really great and really important advice, and covering many aspects of the application. Thank you for that, Kate. Would anyone else like to? I think this is our last moderated question that we have. If anyone else would like to add in some perspective, that would be most welcome. Or we can go to our chat, which I think Alejandra and folks are monitoring, and we can get some questions from the audience. Okay, cool. Let's go to the moderated Q&A. So Alejandra, or would you mind kind of like reading questions in from the chat as they come? Because I could look at it, but
Yeah.
thinking about the recording and keeping the slide up. But.
So someone actually just asked, can we discuss more about NIH postbac and NIH grants? I'm happy to take that. I know Kate also is NIH, so maybe we can both hop on that. Basically, I don't know, what did you want to discuss? Like how to go about getting it, or what is it about? Oh, you want to apply. Okay. So essentially, I applied to one of the programs that is within the NIH Academy. And basically it gave me a stipend, and I was able to kind of choose what lab I wanted to work in. But normally what you do is you go to the NIH, not the NIH Reporter, it's NIH directory. Let me check.
Also, OITE has a page on it. I can pull it up while you're talking about it.
let me pull up the, I'm going to send the link of the program that I did. There's the program that I did. And this was only for 1 year. And then I got, no, this is for 2 years. And then I got sponsored by my PI. So yeah, intramural research training. Yeah, that's what the IRTA is.
Yeah. And the only difference with CRTA is it's just through the NCI. It's a little different. They're roughly the same. The stipend is a little bit more for the CRTA. Yeah, and I'm happy, like if anybody wants to like email me specifically, like I remember I had to apply for it kind of quickly. So I kind of misspoke earlier, and I spent a year with a mentor at my undergrad institution. And then I was kind of debating applying to the postbac originally. And so I lucked out, and it happened such that he was moving jobs. And so I was able to apply for a year. My situation was kind of unique because I was applying it as 2 to 3 years. But if anyone's interested, I'd be happy to look over stuff or chat with you individually over Zoom or a phone call. My email's on the slide. But yeah, I definitely would use the directory that Alejandra shared. And yeah, so my info's there, and that's my science Twitter handle. And then, I would also recommend a couple of things. So I think there's some pro tips for the program where if you have above a 3.5, I think you get a little bit more for your stipend, which is nice. If you have a certain amount of research experience beforehand, you might also be bumped up a salary. I know that I think everybody gets a raise, I believe, your second year. Is that right, Lex?
I got a raise every year. Basically, well, the first time I was with the NAEP, and then I became a CRTA, but I got a raise every year.
Yeah. So like subsequently, yeah, exactly. And there's also one thing to point out is the Office of Intramural Training Education, I think, OITE, is a great resource they have a lot of programs for like applying to med school, applying to MD-PhD, applying to grad school. So I would really highly recommend that as well if you're kind of on the fence, but you are leaning more towards it. I think or you're kind of, do I want to do MD-PhD? Do I want to do something else? They have a lot of programs that help you, like workshops, interviewing workshops, writing your application workshops. And then I also did a program called the NIH Academy. I don't know if I think it was the same one that we did, and it was on health disparities.
Yeah.
And so that was a really cool experience that we got to do too. So.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions about NIH or anything, feel free to email me. There's like an application process that's involved. So if you guys need help with that, just let us know. We're here for you.
And for that, I should mention too, like you're not going to hear back from a lot of the PIs, like they're really busy. Basically what happens is, it really depends on the size of the lab and if they're looking for postbacs. Postbacs are a valuable resource because you're doing a lot of work, but you don't cost as much. So, normally I think most labs take 1 or 2. Some labs are like real big postbac labs. So you'll have like, an imaging center with a ton of postbacs. And I'm sure if you do some research online, you could find the names of those, or like I could do some digging and point you guys towards it. Just don't, it's not personal. If a PI doesn't get back to you, it's not because you don't have a great app. A lot of the times they just don't have a spot. But if they do, don't give up on them. My mentor, I thought she hated me because she like didn't email me back for a month or 2, and then got like a phone call, and now she's like one of my favorite people, and we text all the time. So, sometimes they're busy, sometimes they're not consistent. It's not like a streamlined, organized, like you're going to hear this at this date kind of thing. And for that, you're going to want to apply. I applied January to start in June or July, but I highly recommend, I think you have to apply by January for like the upcoming summer and subsequent year.
Yeah. And I just pasted the directory for the intramural NIH research, which is kind of like the NIH reporter, but for intramural. So that's all the research that's being done at NIH. And essentially you can like put advanced search options and then things like that, where you can find people or different topics.
Absolutely loved it. Highly, highly, highly recommend if you're on the fence.
Very good.
Depends on the PI. I would, one quick thing. I'm sorry, I'm adding so many things, but when you are talking.
Sorry, Kate. Was there another question in the chat that you're responding to?
There's like, I think we have questions from Madeline, Albert, and Caitlin have all asked questions too.
Okay. Okay, cool. I just wanted to make sure, in case you were responding re-NIH to another question, if you could read the question.
Yes.
So yeah, no worries.
Oh, so Madeline, are you asking with regard to the NIH, like, do you need to know what field? No, not at all. I think, if you want to email me, like, I love, like, I don't know, mentor matchmaking or like helping people come up brainstorm lists. For oncology, stress physiology, women's health, I think they're all on the same floor, if I'm not mistaken, in the building I was in. Oh, for the MSTP, I mean, to answer that generally, no. I mean, I happen to like know what I'm interested in, and some people do, but actually, Brenna, do you want to, not to put you on the spot, but do you want to kind of touch on?
Yeah. So I think the most important thing is to be able to talk about the research experiences you've had and what interests you about those. And I think from there, really, you can explore whatever you want. And some people like Kate will have an idea of what they want to do right when they come in, and they'll have a pretty specific idea of the kind of project they want to work on. I really have liked the research that I've done in the women's reproductive health lab that I was in, but I'm also interested in exploring other things. So just to reiterate, being able to articulate what you've done before is really the most important thing, and what you like about research.
And I would add to that, if you are a person who, like, you have a wide array of interests, as I'm sure most of you do, and like many, pretty much all of us do in terms of research when we're coming in, something to look for in a program, I would say, is will that program allow you the leeway to choose from a lot of different fields? Because the reality is that some programs are geared towards a very specific type of MD-PhD student, and that's fine. But if you don't feel after reading that like you fit that paradigm, then you can know from the get-go that, okay, this isn't a place that I should apply even from the primary stage. But it's hard to, I think it's important to do that research early, or that homework early on when you're making your list, because otherwise you don't know. This is something that I did, I remember very consciously when I was making up my list of schools. But yeah, I think that's really excellent advice.
And kind of on that note, real quick, what Mitch just said, I know it's really easy to get an idea of like what you might think of a program, or you might have your heart set on a program for a specific researcher or some sort of skill or strength that they have, and then get to the interview. And I personally, I mean, I know a few people who are applying, and like you get to the school, you're really excited about it, but then it's just not a good fit. It just doesn't feel right. It's maybe socially not the environment you wanted. Maybe you wanted a bigger class. Maybe you wanted a smaller class. It's okay if you are excited about a program and you don't get in. It's okay if you don't end up liking it as much as you want. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. If you loved a program and you thought they loved you and you didn't get in, that's not a reflection of you. Like I think Susie had mentioned, there are so many random things that are out of anyone's control that are not a reflection of you, and vice versa on their end too. Like they want to impress you as much as you want to impress them. So
super important advice. And unless there's another pressing question kind of in this vein, I know folks were patient earlier on. I would love to make sure we touch on the fee waivers question. We had a question earlier about different experiences with fee waivers, but yeah.
So there were two other questions. So there's a question from Alan, there's a question from Albert, and a question from Caitlin right after that in the chat. So I just want to make sure that like we get to those too, because they
Yes. Yeah, for sure. So I think let's touch on that question about fee waivers real quick first, if like anyone would want to speak to those specifically, and then we can get to those three. Let's do that. So anyone who has experience with like the fee waivers that has any advice they would like to impart, that would be awesome.
I don't know. Did any of us do them? Because I personally did not. So I don't know if anyone on this call specifically did. Some of my friends did. And I would say if you want to get like the best information on it, my advice would be either go directly to like the websites, lots of Googling, or how I found out they were a thing. My family, I didn't qualify for them. I also didn't really know how to apply for them, but there was at my academic institution like pre-med advisors. And if you have pre-med advisors, they're going to know about the fee waivers for Amcas. So I'll use them because they're there to help you, and they'll be able to tell you more specifically like how to apply for those. But from what I remember, I don't think it would necessarily cover everything. It depends, I think, on the kind of what level you'd fall in on. Some would only cover like so many applications. Some might cover like travel expenses, but it's, it never hurts to apply. Like the worst thing that they can say is no. So if cost of things, the cost limited how many schools I applied to, and if that's going to be like a limit for you, or something you're like, I'm a college student, I can't afford to drop $3,000 on this, then definitely look into it. Spend the time now. Probably earlier is better to look into the fee waivers. Also, just like, FAFSA or anything else that requires you to fill out applications. I think the sooner you could get those in, the better chance you have of getting them. So I would talk to your pre-med advisors, and then some schools also have scholarships for applying. So like your institution itself might have money set aside for its current students to apply. So just things to consider.
Great.
Something Kate touched on earlier is if you get in touch with individual programs, a lot of times they will be willing to provide you with financial assistance for their unique secondary application. I know that we have provided some just because people have contacted us at UIC. Mm-hmm. So I don't believe that's unique to UIC. I think once you get to the secondary component and you start reaching out to program administrators, you get to see like you have some more human contact and you get some more empathy. So Kate might expand on that, but that was something that she originally brought up.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Go ahead, Kate. But then if we could keep it like a little bit short, I hate to cut anyone off, but I just want to make sure we get to those last few questions that were talking.
Yeah, totally. As I mentioned, and as Brenna said, more than one school was open to it. Sometimes you might get told no. That's okay. One other important thing to note is that for the fee waiver, just know that I think it might be similar to FAFSA, but they look at your information from the previous tax year. So if you have your circumstance changed and you might qualify, like because of your current status as you apply, it's important to know that they go off of the previous year, I believe. I would double check with your pre-med advisor though.
Great point. Thanks, Kate. So that first question in the chat, I can't see it just because I'm keeping up the panelist slide. But if somebody could read it, that would be awesome.
Yeah, so I think we answered Madeline's question on do you have to know what your PhD is, but then Albert asked, how do rotations work in M1 and M2 year?
I was going to say that's very school specific. Here at UIC, you do a rotation in the summer before your M1 year. Then you do another one between your M1 and M2 year. And then you have an optional to do a third after you take step one, and then like before you actually officially join a lab. And if you really need to do a fourth, like some people will do a fourth. But that's how it works here. That's generally, I believe, like on most of the places I visited, is like general outline. Some places don't do it right before the summer before M1. Sometimes they either just go straight to M1 and they do two in the summer. But it's generally like in the summers at these schools.
And then Caitlin asked, how do you go about starting your own research project in lab, and what advice do you have for students who want to start their own project as opposed to being a research assistant on somebody else's project?
I think the key thing is to just really show a lot of like initiative. And so I had my own project at the Neuro-Oncology Institute, and basically I just kind of went to my PI. I had like a little presentation, kind of like a little, this is what I kind of want to study, blah, 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 blah. And then kind of looked at different like assays that I could do, or like experiments that I could do. And, you know, we just talked about it, and I said, you know, is this feasible? Is this something that I can do? And yeah, I guess my PI just let me run with it. But I think honestly, just having that initiative and having and just explicitly talking to your PI about it is key.
Yeah, I would agree wholeheartedly with that. Go ahead, Kate.
Yeah, and just a quick note on that is I think it depends too on if you want to actually like conceive the project, lead it. I think it depends a lot on the funding of the lab that you're in, and also the PI's like willingness. A lot of PIs are like happy to support that if there is funding available, or if you have some sort of like, I know some institutions will have like undergraduate research funding training. Most of the time that's to support you to work on like a project with a grad student, but it could be used for other things. I do know someone at the NIH who the way that her lab worked, the PI was just kind of like, okay, my postdoc left. I trust you. I think you're very capable. Would you like to lead this project, stay an extra year? And so now it's not a project that she conceived like entirely. I do think she helped with forming it though, but she gets to lead it. And so even if it's not fully yours from start to finish, and I think that could also be helpful too, because having the PI's input will help you more with like funding. And so it's definitely doable.
There was another question from Madeline. She asked, can you touch on how to answer the why don't you just do research as an MD question? That's definitely one of the hardest questions you're going to get in your interviews. So I probably didn't answer it well, so someone else go.
My go-to is usually
go ahead, Brenna.
On the fact that going through the process of completing a PhD requires you to complete an inquiry process from start to finish. And it teaches you, honestly, a lot about trial and error, about failure, about learning how to solve a problem and coming at a problem from different angles. And to have the experience of doing that day in and day out for 3, 4, 5 plus years is, I think, really critical. Well, for me to do medicine the way I want to do medicine.
Another thing is that if you want to do research, even as just an MD, those things that Brenna was talking about, those skills, you're going to have to develop them at some point. And if you just do an MD, you're still going to have to take time after you finish your degree to go and learn those same skills. And so I guess one of the advantages of an MD-PhD is being able to integrate that into the clinical stuff is probably a little bit more advantageous than, you know, doing your MD, taking time away from the clinical side of stuff to go do strict research, and then also trying to maintain those clinical skills at the same time. And this, it's more structured, and you have a lot of support in the form of your classmates and all your mentors along the way.
Yeah, that's all really, really awesome advice. I agree with Sam. It was definitely, I know, one of the most difficult questions to tackle in and around the applications and in interviews. And I would just reiterate what Joey and Brenna said, is that there's something that is distinct about doing it in like a very blended hybrid fashion from doing sort of trying to do the two things separately. I actually had a lot of conversations with my PI in undergrad about this, because I applied straight through from undergrad, and I had a lot of imposter syndrome and a lot of self-doubt that I was going to be right for this, that I was going to have a chance of getting in. And it was really she who convinced me to move forward and go through with applying. And I was really convinced in part by her and her rationale that, knowing the world of academia and knowing research very well, like Joey said, it still takes a great deal of investment of time to learn to do research well and to be a strong scientist, and as Brenna mentioned, to take a line of inquiry kind of from start to finish. So definitely would reiterate exactly what they said.
I don't know if we have time for one more question in the chat.
Yeah, I think we have about 4 minutes left, so I think we'll take one more question and then wrap up.
So if you already graduated from your undergrad and working a full-time job in other field, how can I gain research experience? I applied for fall 2021 master's program, but still not sure if I can attend due to funding. Master programs don't really provide fundings. Thank you for your time.
Depending on where you live, if there are research universities near you, that can be one place you can look. In my case, during my gap year, I did not work in research because there was one school in the entire area. It's pretty rural, so I ended up working in like the healthcare field instead, and that worked pretty well for me in my application, because you will also get asked, why not just a PhD? Like that, usually it's like, okay, why not just an MD? But one of the girls in like our cohort, she got asked that question several times because she had so much research. Okay, why MD if it's very clearly you want to do research? So something you could look into if you're trying to find research opportunities and you've already graduated, is you can still look at the universities. They might be hiring research assistants or whatever, like outside, and you can find those job postings. So I found some on Indeed, not like in my area, but just in like areas a little further away. And then if you want to work in science, you can always like kind of look towards the biotech field too, whether that's food, which may not be ideal, but it's still going to be like working in a more wet lab based thing. So those are like maybe some things to look at.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's not one I would have thought of, because oftentimes I think a lot of the interviews are more skewed to justify why both, or like justify why PhD. But the other side definitely comes up, and it's an important thing to consider as you're writing your applications, but also as you're deciding whether this program is right for you. So I'm glad we touched on that. Unless there's like anything anyone wants to add at the last minute, I think we could probably wrap up there. Panelists, any last things you want to add? It's okay if not, I'm just asking.
Don't stress too much right now. Don't do it.
Yeah, you guys got this. You can do it.
It'll be fine. Yeah.
You'll get there somehow, no matter what. Like, even when you feel like giving up, like if this is what you really want to do, like there are people who are going to root you on and support you, and, we'll be there for you, and just, it'll happen one way or another.
Also, just beating dead horse, but a lot of people apply more than one time. So even if you don't get in on a first try, that's really not unusual at all. I know other people in our cohort who had to apply multiple times. So it's kind of somewhat of a taboo thing. I think people don't really talk about it that much, but
normal.
If you really want to do it, even if you don't get in the first try again. So that's parting wisdom.
I love that. Well, I think that's a lovely note to end on. Thank you so much to all of our panelists for being here and sharing your perspectives. This was great. I feel like I learned from this. And thank you to all of you who joined us tonight. Thank you for your questions, your participation, and and for listening. This, I don't think, will be our last word. This will be one, like I said, in a series of panels that we want to keep doing to reach out to the physician scientist interested community at large, to kind of spread the word about a lot of stuff that we didn't necessarily know when we were in your shoes. So be on the lookout for all of that. And this is the website for our program, and here's our Twitter handle. The emails, as you probably may have taken down, of our panelists are here. And thanks, everyone. With that, I think I'll stop the recording.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.